About 5,000 years ago, people in Western Europe were building tombs and ceremonial sites using vast blocks of stone and great boulders. These megalithic structures appear in many different forms, and in Ireland, in the valley of the Boyne, just north of Dublin, they turn up as very impressive tombs that archaeologists call passage graves. Impressive, if only for their size. Newgrange, for instance, on the banks of the Boyne River, rates as one of Europe's finest examples. It's an enormous cairn of boulders, almost 40 feet high, with a cruciform chamber deep inside at the end of a 60-foot passage. Although it's been recently conserved and is open to visitors again, it's one of the best documented megalithic tombs there is anywhere, due to the efforts of Professor Michael O'Kelly of Cork University, who's only recently completed an extensive examination of the monument. Inside, it's basically unchanged since the builders left in about 3200 BC.
Where we're standing here now in the centre of the floor, the top of the roof is 20 feet above us. And as you can see, built of these great slabs of stone that are laid as corbels, the vault narrowing bit by bit until the top is finally closed with a great flat slab.
Now, the burials must have taken place in these chambers here. 3 very large chambers, like small rooms, leading off this central chamber.
Yes, such evidence as we have from sites that have remained undisturbed until modern excavation, the cremated bones of the dead were placed in these small side chambers, and in quite a number of the Irish tombs of this kind, placed in large basin stones. The slab of Wicklow granite, which has been carved to this basin-like form, a sort of shallow bowl, if you like.
The other remarkable thing about this tomb is that little slit above the doorway, above the entrance, right at the end of the passage, right on the outside of the mound. And it's on midwinter's day that the sun strikes that little slit and sends a shaft of light right up the passage and right into this chamber.
Yes.
That must be remarkable to see.
It's a very dramatic thing to see, and when I first saw it in 1967 it was, I was here alone, and it was positively startling to see the way the light illuminated the whole interior. And I expected to hear a voice from the past, or a cold hand touching me on the shoulder, telling me more or less, get out of here.
You're quite certain that the ancients who designed this place intended that this should happen?
There can be no doubt about this, because we have had this verified by not only the astronomers, but by various very detailed survey methods.
It's wonderful to be able to walk in here and see this place almost like the builders must have left it 5,300 years ago. But in fact, we know very little about the people themselves.
Very little indeed, in spite of the near 20 years' work which I have done here. There's a great deal of mystery still about the living people who built it. Now, we have here, built of great stones, this house for the dead, which should last forever. But the houses of the living, the people who built it, these have disappeared without leaving surface trace. They would have been buildings of timber, thatched roofs, and whatever, and must have stood all round about us here in the Boyne Valley. But we know absolutely nothing about them.
What is known, or thought to be understood about this culture, is now under review by prehistorians. The previously accepted view is that tombs such as Newgrange and the other passage graves of the Boyne Valley must be the result of megalithic builders on the move across Europe, from a starting point in the Mediterranean area. It's generally believed that they crossed the English Channel and the Irish Sea by boat, established themselves on Ireland's east coast, and then moved west to the Atlantic seaboard. The less impressive monuments and the simple stone circles of the west are explained as the ragged edge of a culture that reached its peak in the Boyne Valley and gradually dissipated the further west it travelled. That theory held good until Dr. Johan Björnholt of the Institute of Archaeology in Stockholm began to excavate in the west at a place called Carrow Moor in County Sligo. Out in the fields at the foot of the mountain of Knocknarea, on a broad peninsula that juts out into Sligo Bay, there's a megalithic graveyard which is probably the biggest cemetery of its kind in Western Europe. There are between 40 and 50 sites of one kind or another, many with burial chambers surrounded by a circle of huge boulders, each weighing a ton or more. One of the first Carrow Moor tombs that Dr. Björnholt excavated produced dates that shook the accepted wisdom.
The inside of the chamber is very small, only half a meter wide, and 80 centimeters long. So it's a very small cyst indeed. And strangely enough, contained hundreds of cremations. Enormous material. And probably the reason for this is that it has been used for such a long time, because we were able to show that this is actually one of the earliest monuments in Europe. It dates back to 4500 BC, and so we were able to say that this simple cyst is the first actual megalithic construction within the cemetery.
Where did you get your radiocarbon dating from?
The radiocarbon dating from this one came from the packing around one of the side walls in the chamber.
How many people do you think might have been buried in that cyst?
Well, the osteological analysis is not ready because it's, I think we have 35 kilos of burned human bones from this one, pointing out at least 100 individuals if we compare the amount to what we have had in the other graves.
The other stone circles gave the same sort of radiocarbon dates, very much earlier than the monuments of the Boyne Valley, 1,000 years in many cases. The Carramore circles are also thought to have been covered by cairns of stones, a smaller version of the Boyne Valley design, but Johan Bernhout believes that no such cairn ever existed at Carramore.
Well, normally, if you have cairns, even if they are very destroyed, you have remains from stones all over the area. We have features within, just to take one example, from the first dolmen we visited here, the first one we excavated in 1977, we have inner stone circles, half circles, ritual pits, and other features that belong to the original construction. And that means that they couldn't have been placed there if there was a cairn. We have cremations, say, placed in positions where the cairn should have been.
All around the perimeter of the stone circle, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
And within the circle itself?
Well, inside the circle.
But surely a cairn could have covered those cremations if they were inside the circle?
Yes, but they are from all periods. We have, from the erection of the monument, going over to the late Neolithic, into the early Bronze Age, we have quite a lot of beaker material inside the circles. That means that if the cairn has gone away, it was taken away immediately after the monument was erected.
After 2 seasons of excavation, the Swedish team turned their attention to the landscape around Carramore. They mounted a thorough scientific survey. Firstly from the air, where they took thousands of infrared photographs. They walked over every inch of the peninsula between Ballysadare Bay and Sligo Bay, recording every visible monument and at the same time testing for a high phosphate content of the soil, which is another clue to man's presence in the past. As a result, more than 100 possible settlement sites were pinpointed on a map. From the aerial photographs, several circular shapes showed up on the side of Knocknarea, 1,000 feet or so above sea level. And there I found site director Stefan Berg turning back a thin layer of moss and heather at a point where the aerial photographs had shown one of these early settlements.
Yeah, we found an oval-shaped hut, you could call it. And I think it's 10 meters long and 6 meters at the narrowest point. And it's formed by a wall that runs around the oval.
So that's the wall over there?
Yeah.
Then?
And
there's a ditch too?
Yeah, it's a ditch outside, and the ditch runs around it, actually.
But you say you found some post holes, indicating some sort of structure here?
Yeah, I think we have around 35 post holes on the wall, all around the hut. And we have seen that some of them are actually leaning into the center of the hut. They are probably part of a construction for a tent-like construction.
What did you find inside?
I think we have nearly 300 numbered finds that we have taken in for analysis. And then most of them are flint and church scrapers, actually.
In this box here in front of us?
Arrowheads, too. This is a very nice
that's
one.
An arrowhead, yes.
That's made out of chert. Chert is quite a type of bad flint that is natural in the ground here.
But that's quite finely made.
Yeah.
About the size of one's little fingernail.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the best one we have. Mm-hmm. And here, for example, that's the most typical find we have. This is a hollow scraper with a concave scraping surface, right?
What could that have been used for?
To straighten branches and so on. For arrows.
Deer bones found at another hut site higher up the mountain led the Swedish archaeologists to believe that the Carramore people used the hut for hunting at certain times of the year. For the first time, Dr. Björnholt had direct evidence of the people behind the monuments at Carramore. On the beach at Carlina Moor, the Swedish survey recorded a large terrace of oyster shells. The shells showed up on the beach as a 12-foot cliff face, made up of layer upon layer of shells, and has always been thought of as a natural feature resulting from some primeval disturbance of the seabed. But the shell terrace that extends along the shoreline for at least a couple of miles is man's doing, Carramore man, as I can see in the trench that Joran Bernhout has excavated into this cliff face of shell.
We are actually standing on the Stone Age level at the moment, and we have a stratification going from around 3000 BC and up to the early Bronze Age in this particular spot.
How have you been able to date this? Because previously, as we were saying, people thought this was a natural feature built up by the action of the sea and the moving up of the land.
Yes, already during the survey year in 1978-79, we were able to take samples from the outside of the midden, where we found the hearts with burned stones, animal bones, knowing that it couldn't be a natural thing. It must be man-built.
So these were hearths where they were cooking?
Well, we have reason to believe that they cooked the cockles and mussels, but they ate the oysters raw, because we find in the hearth burnt shells from cockles and mussels. And we have also reason to believe that they used stones for boiling in big hides with water. They put in upheated stones that made the water boil.
Can we see any of this here in the section?
Yeah, what you can see here is that some of the hearths are very, very deep. To the left here, for instance, you can see that it is almost 25, 30 centimeters deep, and a hearth used only for a day would never get that depth. You can see at least 10 hearths in this section here in a fine stratification, and as you know, it's very easy to date the hearths by radiocarbon method from the charcoal in them. So it's an ideal place for getting the sections dated here. But as you can see, the hearths also, more or less all of them, have a series of small stones above, and that must be the answer to why they are so deep. They were used for a week or perhaps 2 or 3 weeks during their stay here, their seasonal stay here, because we believe that the stones were put on in the evening, say, to protect the fire from dying out during the night.
What other finds came out of this trench?
Well, it's very interesting that we in the Stone Age layers have no animal bones and no finds beside the hearths and the midden itself, that is the seashells they have been eating, the oysters they have been eating. But in the Bronze Age level, we also get bones from cattle. And this is extremely interesting because that means that they have lived here. You don't bring down your cattle to eat here if you don't live around. And this year we have been able to show that they actually have been staying here for some time. We have found post holes and the remains of leaning standing posts in this section, wind shelters or huts with very deep hearths around and in them.